Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us around the world. Here we are on day 38 of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Daily War Room Update, together with our partners, JLTV. Today, I'm Maurice Hirsch, and I'm joined today by my esteemed colleague, Lenny Ben-David. What we're going to be discussing today is UNRWA, all different types of aspects of UNRWA. What is UNRWA, how it came about, who it deals with, who UNRWA is, for those unfamiliar, the specific UN agency that deals solely with so-called Palestine refugees, not Palestinian refugees, Palestine refugees, and how that entire body came about. Today, it is a huge body that has tens of thousands of employees and provides services ostensibly for millions of Palestine refugees. But before we get into UNRWA, the general update on the war, starting in Gaza, obviously, probably there we can see the continuation of the IDF ground forces against the terrorists in Gaza. Probably the most significant incident that happened in the last 24 hours in Gaza was the entry into the Rantisi hospital in the north of the Gazan Strip. There, in a video that was filmed by the IDF spokesman himself, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, he took us around the hospital, showing the abuse of the hospital by the terrorists, taking us into tunnels that the terrorists had dug inside the hospitals, showing us a massive array of weapons, assault rifles, suicide belts, RPGs that were being held and stored in the hospital itself. That we'd also seen fighting and shooting from the hospital by the terrorists. Most worryingly and horrifically, he also took us into the dungeon. It's not really the basement; it's the dungeon of the hospital, where it's clear that Israeli hostages taken captive on the 7th of October were held. We're not sure exactly how many people were held there, but at least a number of hostages were held there. We saw a chair that had obviously been used to bind the hostages to the chair. And shockingly, what was also shown there was diapers and baby bottles. We know that of the 240 hostages, there are not a small number, 35 children, of whom 10 are under the age of 5. We're talking about little Kfir Bibas, who was just 9 months old when he was kidnapped and taken hostage by the Gazan terrorists. So we're not sure exactly what's going on there. I'm sure that in time we will have more information as to what's going on. The IDF is obviously continuing on with its operations. That's on the southern front. On the northern front, we're seeing the continuation of shelling from Hezbollah into the north, and the IDF responding. Just this afternoon, more of those back and forth on that border, and the IDF having to shoot down what's being described at the moment as just an unidentified flying object, not a UFO, obviously Area 51, but an unidentified flying object traveling towards Akko, one of Israel's northern towns. So that's something obviously which is a developing situation. Earlier this afternoon, we saw again sirens and rockets falling in Eilat, Israel's most southern area. So really, we're seeing fighting from our most northern areas to our most southern areas, constantly at different levels of intensity. Within Judea and Samaria, also the West Bank, we're seeing that continuation of anti-terror operations and the constant motivation of the terrorist organizations to carry out further attacks as they can possibly carry out, and the arrest again of many of these terrorists. Within Israel, we're still saying relative calm, with the Israeli Arab population, according to the latest studies, more identifying with Israel and as Israelis than they do as the Palestinian victims that they're trying to present themselves as. So that's really the update on those close areas. Nothing new at the moment. We can't say in any definitive way what the source of the rocket missile that fell in Eilat was. So it could be that involvement of the Houthis, Yemen, another one of Iran's proxies. But that's pretty much the update for now. Now, dealing a little bit more with UNRWA, let's get into UNRWA. UNRWA specifically in Gaza. UNRWA was set up in 1948-49 to deal with the Palestine refugees, those who were displaced from their homes during Israel's War of Independence from June 1946 through the 15th of May 1948. There were originally different numbers that were given out. The official UN number is 711,000 UN refugees or Palestine refugees that were only Arabs. There were additional Jewish refugees who have since obviously been resettled. That number has grown over the years tremendously. At the end of 2022, there are some 6 million Palestine refugees registered with UNRWA in the different fields, focusing specifically on Gaza. In Gaza, originally, there were 70,000 people living there in 1948. They were that population grew by 200,000 refugees during that war. Israel at the time, people may not know this, suggested to include the Gaza Strip within Israel's borders and give equal citizenship rights to all of the Gazan residents. That was an offer rejected by the Arab countries. That's according to a UN report from 1951. Since then, the number of UNRWA-registered refugees has grown tremendously. At the end of 2019, there were 1,460,000 UNRWA refugees. In the last 2.5 years, as of the second half of 2023, according to UNRWA figures, there are now 1,577,000 UNRWA refugees. And so we've seen just in the last 2.5 years, a growth, 3.5 years, a growth of 120,000 almost refugees. There are also other registered non-refugee people with UNRWA. In 2019, the end of 2019, they numbered 161,000. These are the spouses of UNRWA-registered refugees or the children of the spouse of UNRWA-registered refugees. And so that number grew by an incredible 25% from 160,000 at the end of 2019 to the second half of 2023, rising to 208,000 additional people. All in total, UNRWA says that it's the population that it deals with in Gaza is 1,784,000 people, which is over 76% of what the CIA estimates as the entire population of Gaza, which is 2,098,000 people. So really, what we are seeing there is if 75%, and this argument we've made before, 75% of the people in Gaza are registered refugees. Statistically, 75% of those who participated in the October 7 massacre were either refugees themselves or educated in the UNRWA schools. Now, it's widely believed that the UNRWA numbers are nothing, aren't particularly accurate, and so it plays into this whole field of statistics and other numbers that are coming out of Gaza, which have to be treated with concern. For example, Lenny's just going to give a quick update on the idea of how many casualties have there been in Gaza since the start of the war. What does that mean? Where are those numbers coming from? And what are we looking at? Lenny, please.
Thank you, Maurice. I have investigated Palestinian war casualties over the last decade, from 2014, 2021, and constantly we see the same type of fraud. I'll even call it a scam, and it is being accepted face value. And this time around, it's even worse, because we know that the Ministry of Health in Gaza is actually a Hamas organization. the orders, the numbers come from Hamas. And when they have a press conference, as they just did recently, surrounded by bodies from a so-called Israeli massacre that Israel was not involved with, there was a standard, there was a platform that said Gaza Ministry of Health. We know that they just came up with numbers, again, they constantly move them up, of over 11,000 dead, of whom they claim 4,500 were children and 3,000 were women. The remainder is
just over 3,000 people who they don't account for.
Or seven males. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing was in previous years, they would break it down to males, females, children, and elderly. They learned their lesson because their lies were open to everybody when they would show also the number of fighters and the number of civilians. And in some years, that ratio of fighters to civilians was 1-to-1. And in terms of the number of males who were killed, it was over 60%. And women and children were 27, 30%. And then the elderly and other unknown. The man who recorded the deaths for the Ministry of Health in Shiva Hospital was asked, how do you define the people that come in? And he said years ago, if I can't define them and they're not picked up by a military unit, I will classify them as civilians. So the numbers have been false, they've been a scam, and they continue to be a scam. Of course, the numbers do not include people who are killed by Hamas's own rockets. They do not include some 600 people who have died of natural causes in Gaza, according to the life expectancy figures of the CIA. By now, there would be 600 people. I would keep asking, where are the bodies? After two big explosions, one in Jabalia and another one at the Al-Ilha hospital, each one, Hamas claimed 400 were killed. And of course, it wasn't done. The hospital was not done by Israel. I followed through it.
Where are the bodies? Where are the people? How do they get such accurate numbers when even in Israel, we aren't 100% sure of how many people exactly died, how many are missing, but they have got pinpoint numbers, incredibly.
Maurice, I followed them to the cemeteries.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I discovered the photographs of their funerals. And instead of the 400 or 500 people, I saw 40. And instead of women and children, I saw men. And so it is a scam. Unfortunately, it is Hamas is feeding the world and the media rotten data. And the media is saying grace.
Unbelievable. And that brings us right on to our guest today. Our guest today is Marcus Sheff. Marcus Sheff is the CEO of Impact SE. Impact stands for the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Tolerance in School Education. For those joining us today who don't already follow the work of Impact SE, this is the time. Impact, IMPACT, PACT-SE. Go in, follow. You'll find a world of amazing information of the highest quality. People really going through school books all over the world and evaluating their content, how much they contain messages of peace, how much they contain messages of just good education, and how much in the case of UNRWA and the PA, their messaging is just terrible. Marcus, thank you for joining us. What we would like to focus on and just your findings from the last few days and your trips around the world to educate and to inform decision makers as to what's going on in the UNRWA schools, their educational materials, the involvement of their teachers, their students in terror, around terror. The floor is yours, Marcus, please.
Thank you so much, Maurice. Thank you, Lenny. So quite rightly, we and people outside of Israel as well are asking how human beings, these terrorists, reach such depths of depravity. How Hamas, this genocidal death cult, no less evil than ISIS, raped children and women, burned families alive, maimed, beheaded, and snuffed out 1,200 lives, abducted babies and the elderly who are still held in Gaza. All of this we know. And how they were proud of this. As opposed to the Nazis who tried to hide their unspeakable crimes, they recorded this and made sure that this was open to everybody. So we at the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education, Impact SE, we have a key answer. And the key answer is that for years, schools in Gaza and in the West Bank have indoctrinated children with extreme Jew hatred. And they've done this through funding of the international community. For instance, more than half of the UNRWA budget, which you are talking about, goes to education. And for the Palestinian Authority, the same applies, more than half of those budgets to education. And just to be clear, it is exactly the same school curriculum in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, in Gaza, in PA schools, in UNRWA schools, in Waqf schools, 1.3 million school children learning exactly the same curriculum. And in Gaza, for UNRWA, that is 183 schools, over 286,000 school students. So what do they learn? We ask ourselves. And Impact SC has been documenting this answer for many, many years now, as you know, Maurice, closely analysing line by line, page by page, the textbooks taught in UNRWA schools. And the contents are frankly horrifying. They have always been, even more now so. They teach students that the fate of Israeli Jews is extermination, that Jews spread corruption, and that will lead, and I'm quoting, all of this is quotes from the textbook, lead to their annihilation. They are taught to cut the necks of the enemy. I'm sure that sounds desperately and painfully familiar. They talk about in UNRWA schools, by the way, this is UNRWA and not PA, massacre of Jews on a bus is to be celebrated as a barbecue party. Taught time and time again that terrorists are role models, dying is preferable to living, becoming a martyr will be rewarded. So just some of the examples of hate, blatant incitement, which runs, like a thread, but it is actually a strategy, a Palestinian Authority national strategy throughout the curriculum, across grades and subjects, and permeates maths and science as well. Children are asked to weigh terrorists from, not called terrorists, of course, called martyrs, from the First Intifada, from the Second Intifada, how many do you get, not apples and oranges. And unsurprisingly, there is nowhere in this body of textbooks where peace is mentioned as a possibility, which means that these children have no idea in their minds of what peace might look like, how it could be a desirable outcome. What they're given instead is a very steady diet. One Palestine from the river to the sea, which will be gained through jihad, through martyrdom, through their own sacrifice. And I think that is a very important point, the constant repetition of the need for their sacrifice. This is UNRWA schools, United Nations. Check those United Nations educational values, check those UNESCO values, and tell me if they are in any way connected with the values and standards of the United Nations. And these are the lessons that are drilled into the heads of school students in UNRWA schools in Gaza every single day. And as I said, by the Palestinian Authority as well. So, we've got to ask ourselves at this point, what did we think was going to happen when year after year you educate young people towards these ideas? What we saw happen is what Impact SE thought and warned was going to happen. And Maurice, you referred to a publication of ours last week, which is really stark. It reveals, first of all, and by the way, this did not take too much time to do the research, at least 100 Hamas members who have carried out terror attacks against Israelis are graduates of the UNRWA education system. This was publicly available information. It's on the Hamas website. And in each case, Hamas specifies the school, UNRWA school that they went to, as if this was, valuable and an important part of their education to become terrorists. How they developed as terrorists was by Hamas, connected to their UNRWA education. And another statistic, more than half the school students in Gaza are in UNRWA-operated schools. So think about 3,000 terrorists who stormed across an internationally recognized border on the 7th of October. Statistically, at least 1,500 of them are going to be, again, graduates of these UNRWA schools, these people who committed acts of murder, rape, beheading, and the abduction of Israelis. UNRWA graduates, UN school graduates, with money supported by the international community, including $360 million just last year from the United States of America, probably, if you count over the last 3 years, $1 billion plus.
You're saying to us, Marcus, it's frightening.
Yeah.
It's really frightening. The international community is literally paying to teach Jew hatred and to bring about the massacre of Jews. That's unfortunately a message that we at this stage have to thank our JLTV viewers for joining us, but we will continue on. They are leaving us now, but that's unbelievable, Marcus. How much of this was actually known before? Did the world know that UNRWA is teaching this vile hatred every single day of the week?
Yes, absolutely. We have gone from parliament to parliament, from government to government, and all this information is publicly available. First of all, on our website, second of all, in policy meetings that we have had. And, there has been some really important action taken in Europe by the European Parliament that in the last 5 years has condemned the Palestinian Authority and lately UNRWA as well for hate teaching. There was a suspension of funds by the European Commission for 13 months until the Palestinian Authority changed the hate teaching. It did not. And the funds were restored by an enormous amount of pressure put on them by 15 of the 27 foreign ministries and Ursula von der Leyen herself going to Ramallah to essentially give the funds back against the wishes of the commissioner who funded it. There has been European country after country that has either stopped funding or frozen funding or connected very clearly the hate teaching to the possibility of continued funding. So this action has taken place, and I think this is the key thing, the hate teaching has not stopped, right? This is ultimately the aim here. And so all this pressure brought to bear in Europe, frankly, not by the United States, but by the Europeans, has not stopped the hate teaching, although we are extraordinarily grateful for the commitment and the work done by these European policymakers in trying desperately to get a change. And by the way, this isn't a left-right issue in Europe. The centre-left in the European Parliament are and have been as outraged as the centre-right by this hate teaching. When you have members of Parliament standing up in the European Parliament in Brussels and saying, I would be horrified if my own children were taught this material. Why should we pay for Palestinian children to be taught this information, this material? I think, that tells you the universality of the opposition to this hate teaching. But, and I must come back to this, Maurice, it didn't stop. And that's what has to happen.
Marcus, the support for the PA did stop temporarily, but the support for UNRWA never stopped all the way along, right?
Yeah, and I think that's yes, that is true. That is accurate. Although now the European Commission, Commissioner Vaheli, has frozen that funding to UNRWA as well, as we understand it, until, the European Commission is quite opaque, so it is not always easy to understand. But our understanding is there is also a freeze on UNRWA payments until there is a review of the hate material. And, Mr. Vaheli stands out there as consistently in opposition to the hate teaching and consistently in opposition to European taxpayers supporting this. In the United States, which, as you know, because of Taylor Force, does not financially support the Palestinian Authority, but does support UNRWA to a great extent, we have not seen that kind of real action, although the HR 3260, the Peace and Tolerance and Palestinian Education Act, was passed by the House 2 weeks ago. Brad Sherman's bill. It has been knocking around the House Foreign Affairs Committee for a few years now. It has moved one stage forward, and it checks whether American taxpayer money is being used in order to teach hate, to which I think we can all agree the answer is going to be yes, but that is a process that needs to be gone through.
What's amazing is that the specific American legislation which deals with the whole subject of funding UNRWA, the criteria there are actually quite wide, and they say that UNRWA has to guarantee that no US funds go towards supporting terrorists. Well, if you're giving $360 million a year, the money is going to UNRWA. UNRWA is giving money to the people in Gaza. Most of the people in Gaza are refugees, and among them, not a small amount of them are terrorists and active terrorists. As we've seen, the hotbeds of Hamas activity is actually from the refugee camps. So that should be one reason why the money should be limited and stopped. The other criteria is that they're not teaching, that the education system is really compatible with good values. And that's also something which is clearly not being kept to the standard that I'm sure that the American legislators would like to see. Unfortunately, what there is there's the US administration UNRWA framework agreement, which really places in the hands of UNRWA the job of being the cat that's looking after the cream. UNRWA is meant to monitor its own publications, its own curricula, its own staff, and ensure and guarantee to the US administration that no bad is being done. That's a crazy situation. You have the same type of agreement just a few years ago. The Canadians stopped their funding also to UNRWA. It was then returned as part of also a wider framework agreement, which has also been completely breached, and yet everyone keeps on funding them. How do you explain that dissonance, Marcus?
Yeah, I mean, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head, Maurice. There is, the idea that UNRWA can police itself after everything that we know, year after literally 3 years of reports that we have made of UNRWA producing its own hate educational material, which is goes alongside in parallel to the curriculum that they teach. 1 year after another for 3 years, and yet we are expected to believe that internal auditing mechanisms are going to suffice here. We know extremely well that there is absolutely nothing behind these words, these ideas that UNRWA can police itself. The platform where material is supposed to be on, so it is fully transparent and we can all see it. There's pretty much nothing there. There never has been. An odd science book here or there, but the problematic material has never been on the website. When UNRWA are asked how they teach this material, they say, listen, we've got no choice. This is what they call host nation curriculum, which is to say that if the Palestinian Authority is the host nation, this is what they produce, therefore this is what UNRWA has to teach. This is simply not true. It is not in any sense a rule of the United Nations that they have to teach the host nation curriculum. It is what is called best practice. And I think we all know, and you, Maurice, as a lawyer, can explain better than I, that best practice is not a hard and fast rule, right? It is something that you do if you are able to do that. Clearly here we're not able to do that. And by the way, that we know that the United Nations in Yemen, UNHCR, do not teach the Yemeni curriculum because it is appallingly bad, and they produce other material. UNRWA flatly refuses to do that, and they hide behind the host nation curriculum idea. Website, as I said, nothing on it. This bizarre idea, that they that teachers in UNRWA schools, and imagine this for a moment, you're in a school in Khan Yunis, an UNRWA school, and we are expected to believe that an UNRWA teacher with the textbook in front of that teacher and the textbook in front of students then says to the students, okay, that picture of Dalal Mughrabi on page, whatever it is, 32, and the explanation that she is a hero, she is, of course, a terrorist who killed 38 people, including 13 children in the 1970s, and threw a baby against a wall and killed the baby. You know, we will ignore this and move on. First of all, I find the possibility of that happening just not just negligible. It does not happen. Second of all, nobody's ever seen this material, this supposed substitution material, which they might or might not have created. In fact, the GAO, American Government Accountability Office, produced a report saying quite firmly and frankly, this is just a nonsense. It is material might or might not exist, certainly not taught. There is no evidence it's taught, and we're not. How are we expected to believe it's taught? So, you know, UNRWA's got a way, time and time again, with, you know, these PR explanations. They put a fortune of money into PR. They have an office on K Street, which your American viewers will know is, you know, the center of lobbying in the US. So you have a UN organization with money from the US, using that money in order to lobby the US Congress, legislator, and government. This makes absolutely no sense to anybody. But it is
25% of their budget. Almost 25% of UNRWA's budget actually comes from America. If their operating budget last year was $1.2 billion, and America contributed $360 million. So it's a substantial part of US taxpayer dollars that are going back to then as best practice to teach Palestinian Gazan children how to hate and murder Jews, and all that using US funds in breach of US law. That's something which sounds almost imaginary, that everyone would turn such a complete blind eye to it.
It is really beyond the imagination. And we, you know, Impact SC has, you know, talked about this for a few years now, and as I said, there have been, you know, really positive moves in Europe, and we are very grateful for that. But now I think we've reached a point where, you know, this is no longer, you know, something which we you know, should be talking about and educating about. We're shocked. We are horrified. We're in mourning. I think we all are in mourning in relation to what happened on October the 7th, and the pain that we as a research institute feel, and this is a personal thing for all of us, but for us as a research institute, who've said time and time again, for God's sake, you know, stop this. It cannot continue. There will be terrible things. There will be utter disasters from this. And we've seen small terrible things before, of course, murders and terrible acts of terrorism. But this, October the 7th, you know, we heard about these acts, and we know the curriculum inside out, and the connective tissue between them. You know, as a research institute, you know, we are now beyond, if you like, you know, talking nicely to legislators, policymakers about, you know, the possibility of teaching hate to children, and I think we are, all of us need to be slamming our fists on the table and saying, how in the name of God do we allow this to happen? And let's stop this right now, not another day of this hate teaching.
I think what makes the situation even worse and really compounds it is the fact that these UN organizations have no accountability whatsoever. You can't sue a UN organization, even though their contribution to the October 7 massacre is, I would say, beyond doubt. Part of that whole system of indoctrination, of hatred, of brainwashing, of incitement, that really did provide the platform, the theoretical, and even, as you said previously, even the practical basis of slitting people's throats as part of an educational curriculum, which really that's ISIS. That is the Hamas ISIS connection. Here we really hear that it's not only Hamas ISIS, it's UNRWA Hamas ISIS to complete that equation, and all being funded by the international community, funding messaging which is completely anti-peace, anti-education, anti-values, supporting the murder of Jews, and something which really has continued on even though the world is looking on and is saying really not only nothing about it, but is happily and willfully participating in that funding.
Listen, I have to say, and at the risk of repetition, but the European Union has put its foot down, and the European Parliament has put its foot down too, and this is really important. The United States needs to put its foot down too. And I think that is, where the effort needs to be, where the focus needs to be. As you said, Maurice, it is, what was it, 25% of that whole UNRWA budget. The majority of that going to education. We know what lies at the core of this education. We've just been talking about it. It is unimaginable. It is intolerable that American taxpayers, that good people in America, frankly, the good people in the American government and in Congress can be a part of this. One is convinced they do not want to be a part of this, so they must now get to the next stage of not being a part of this, and that is saying, stop, enough.
So Marcus, I want to take you on to a little bit of a wider picture of the area, considering also Impact SE's work. Does this necessarily have to be the case? Does it have to be the fact that Arab countries necessarily teach Jew hatred as part of, and Israel hatred, and wiping Israel off the face of the map as part of their educational curriculum?
Right, and thank God, the answer, Maurice, is no. And we've spent the last 2 or 3 years, really focusing on that part of our work which makes us proud, happy, content, because there is another side of this. School education is obviously the most efficient way of inculcating to hate. Delivery of hate through schools works every time, but it is also the key to fostering the development of peaceful, tolerant, stable societies of the future. The delivery of peace and tolerance in relation to respect for the other, for the individual other. Peacemaking is the way to resolve conflict. This delivered in the schoolroom is also incredibly powerful, because textbooks are very authoritative. That is the bottom line. I know for Americans, this might not be that clear, but imagine a Middle East outside of Israel, where you get one book, one grade, one subject. It's got a picture of the ruler on it, and everybody knows these are the values. This is
Marcus,
the identity
Marcus,
which is being passed down.
Marcus, let me just interrupt you for a second there. What you just said now is, I think, fundamental for some of our audiences to understand. When we're talking about the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA and their school curriculum, we're talking about a situation which is basically dictatorial. There is one set of school books. This is what you teach. There isn't a plethora of school books that are approved by the Ministry of Education or Department of Education, and then each school can individually choose from that approved list which materials they teach. This is one line being taught everywhere throughout the educational system. I'm describing that correctly?
You're describing that absolutely accurately, and as you say, a key point, because for people in the West, they imagine teachers having all kinds of materials in their hands. This does not happen in authoritarian societies. They're given one option, and the teachers have to teach it. And so, when we look around the Middle East, we look at the United Arab Emirates, and it's been a joy for us to work with them, real professionals, and together, the crafting of what is called benchmarks, which are the basis for the Emirati textbooks today. There is respect for Jews. There is respect for others, if you like. An understanding in the United Arab Emirates that peace and prosperity is absolutely linked with positive education. And that for the United Arab Emirates to be prosperous, to do well economically, they need to teach ideas of respecting the other, of peace, which I think we can all agree is accurate. However, what the United Arab Emirates did was really codify this in a superb set of textbooks. And you know, we have worked with them on Holocaust education, which is going to be part of the curriculum, and also talking to them not just about, to paraphrase others smarter than me, not just how Jews died, but how Jews lived in the Middle East for 2 millennia. And you know, that intrinsic link between Jews in the Arabian Peninsula and Arabs in that place. Saudi Arabia, you know, that was not the easiest of battles, but the Saudis have essentially eliminated pretty much all the anti-Semitism in their school curriculum, which was infamous, by the way. You know, the State Department really focused on the curriculum after 9/11, understanding that 15 of the 19 9/11 attackers were Saudi educated, as well as Osama bin Laden himself. It is really gone through a remarkable change. And, you know, this is so important also, not just because Saudi is so important, as you know, but because Saudi textbooks really do migrate. They are studied all over the world, and you know, where the Saudis lead, others in the Sunni world follow. There are, you know, changes in Egypt, a year-by-year change to the curriculum. They're now at grade 6, but from 1 to 6, hate eliminated, peaceful, tolerant ideas. And so that's Al-Sisi, of course. King Mohammed VI in Morocco really focused on textbooks. And, you know, what we have now is a curriculum which talks about the that connective tissue between Jews in Morocco and Moroccan national identity, how important Jews are to Moroccan history, to Moroccan culture. Pictures of Muslim children at a Friday night dinner in a Jewish home, talking about Mimuna, talking about individual Jews and how important they are to Morocco. You know, this is remarkable. And there are other countries, some of whom, you know, probably better not to talk about publicly, with whom we have been working on reforming the education system. This is, you know, fundamental change in the MENA region in the Middle East and North Africa, because it does start with education. It does start with the school. And imagine beyond. Imagine Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, who you know, we have been talking to. So actually, if you look at all of this, the only, if you like, Sunni country, because you can call the Palestinian Authority, you know, and UNRWA a Muslim Sunni country in that sense, that has regressed is, as you know very well, Maurice, the Palestinian Authority, who rewrote that curriculum between 2014 and 2016. And when the Al-Sisis and the Mohammed VI and the Mohammed bin Ziyads and the Mohammed bin Salmans were reforming in a positive way, they regressed to this dark jihadi curriculum of death cult, essentially. They are alone in that now in the region. But unfortunately, the results of that has been beyond any of our imaginations.
Marcus, I look at it in a bigger picture as well, that you have those countries that are moving towards the Abraham Accords, who are those you described, versus what they call the axis of resistance, which is led by Iran. And you see the Houthis calling for the murder of Jews. You see what's going on by Hamas now, unfortunately, in Judea and Samaria. But it's also to some degree because Iran demands it. And
yeah, I think that's right, Lenny. You know, the Iranian curriculum is exactly as you would expect it to be. Appalling in every way. It encourages its young people to martyrdom, as they call it, examples of children in the Iran-Iraq war, you know, throwing themselves across minefields so that there could be an advance of Iranian troops, anti-Semitism, obviously a connection between historical discussions about Persian Empire and, you know, very clear instructions about what Iranian hegemony in the Arab world would look like, even to the point of telling young Iranians that if they've got to learn Arabic, because that's how we're going to conquer, if you like, the Levant. So yes, you know, I was specific, if you like, about, you know, Sunni countries, but yes, in this sense, there is that linkage with Shia Iran, and you know, the kind of material which is being taught there. And by the way, you know, we know the, you know, connection between Hamas and Iran. the PA write this curriculum. Hamas are happy to teach it not only in its own schools in Gaza, but in the UNRWA schools in Gaza, which are, Hamas approved in every single way, as I'm sure we could all imagine. That tells you how bad it is, frankly.
So moving forward, Marcus, we're talking now about the war in Gaza. Israel's stated goal is to rid the Gaza Strip of all of the different terrorists. We're not only talking about Hamas, but also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, a member of the PLO, and really getting rid of all of those evil elements that participated in the October 7 massacre. And then we have to discuss the day after. What role do you see, if any, UNRWA playing in this day after? If I could sum up what you've said until now, UNRWA is a major part of the problem. It teaches hate. It teaches. It incites the population to murder Jews. Could UNRWA play any part in that day after what we are possibly calling the process for denazification of the Gaza Strip in the day after the war ends? That's that process that needs to be adopted. Do you think that UNRWA could possibly shake off its cloak and say, well, now I'm going to be there to support peace?
What I do think is certainly achievable is that the major funders of UNRWA, who are the United States, Germany, and EU, if you add up all of those, and Maurice, you know these figures actually better than I do, but I think that's probably the majority of the money, right? Because everybody else is kind of pocket change compared to those three. If those three do what they need to do now, which is to, again, say to UNRWA, there are no circumstances in the day after that you can continue to teach this curriculum. That is on the assumption that UNRWA are in fact involved in schools and in teaching in Gaza, a subject and a question which is way above my pay grade. But assuming the schools in Gaza are going to be studying the Palestinian Authority's curriculum, that can no longer be the case. That can no longer be the curriculum which these children are studying in Gaza the day after, because we're just going to have, God help us, the same kind of result as we had on October the 7th. And I would say one more thing, and that is, this goes beyond Gaza to the Palestinian Authority, because they're the ones writing this. They're the ones who are making, if you like, the whole educational infrastructure around this curriculum, because it is, in a sense, very administrative. You go from grade to grade to grade, and then you take the tarjihi, right? And in order to take the tarjihi, you have got to go through all those grades, which is why it is the PA schools and the Hamas schools and the UNRWA schools and the Waqf schools, and actually even some of the foreign schools who are teaching, that is to say, schools run by European countries, who are teaching this Palestinian Authority curriculum. That is where we also need to be focusing our attention, because that is the root of this particular evil. That is the root of this incitement of 1.3 school children to, being able to produce the kind of death cult that we saw.
So just another question for you, Marcus. The idea of UNRWA's basic founding idea is that these are the Palestine refugees. These Palestine refugees will eventually be able to, as they say, return to Israel, flood Israel demographically, and change Israel democratically, and expunge the Jewish state in a normal way, as they see their goal. How can UNRWA carry on with that situation when we see the numbers of refugees growing? Really every single year, hundreds and thousands of refugees being added on around the world, not only in Gaza, 117,000 just in 2.5 years, really all over the world those numbers are going. If that's UNRWA's founding idea, what's the funding going for, to teach people that they will eventually destroy Israel? And to what extent is that idea of the right of return part of the curriculum that's being taught?
Mm-hmm. So, I think the answer to that is yes, that is, the zeitgeist of the curriculum. I mean, first of all, there is, and I alluded to this, but, to drill down into it a little bit more, there is the absolute absence of the element of peacemaking with Israel, with Jews. There is one now cursory, and again, Maurice, you know the curriculum very well indeed. There is now just this one very cursory mention, the Oslo Accords, as something which tried, failed, and we're not going to go there again. There is the Arafat's letter, which was doctored to take out, the suggestion of cooperation with Israel. That is it. There were, before 2014, actually mention of peace tries between the Israelis and the Palestinians, between Israelis and Egyptians, the Israeli-Egyptian peace agreement, the Israeli-Jordanian Accord discussions. All of that was taken out, and you have to ask yourself why. And I think the answer to that is, again, back to this vision of between 2014 and 2016, creating this curriculum, which is just Palestine, from the river to the sea. This one state gained through their violence, through the sacrifice of these school children. And so, yes, the curriculum is suffused with these ideas, with ideas of jihad. There is, clearly on maps, there is no idea, no possibility of an Israel existing, map after map in the Palestinian curriculum. In the United Nations, in UNRWA schools, a United Nations organization of which Israel is a member, there is no Israel in the textbooks. And so, yes, UNRWA is, through its teaching in its schools, absolutely propagating an idea of return, of an absence of Israel as, if you like, this temporary feature. Cities inside of Israel assumed to be Palestinian in the school curriculum. And I'm talking here about, Tel Aviv and Haifa and Ashkelon and other cities. And so the strategy is clear, and it's a strategy of the Palestinian Authority in relation to the creation of the curriculum, but it is a strategy entirely adopted by UNRWA, and lock, stock, and barrel. And that is, ultimately the problem here. And UNRWA, has all kinds of ways and means, as we discussed before, of saying, this is how we abide by UN educational standards, by UNESCO standards. This is just not the case. It's, we have never seen any evidence for this. UNESCO derived standards of peace and tolerance, respect for the other, for the individual other. Peacemaking is the way to resolve conflict, no incitement. These are all UN and UNESCO resolutions. I could go on. None of this we see in the Palestinian Authority curriculum. We see the opposite of it, and that is what is taught by UNRWA.
So what we really have, Marcus, I think you're telling us, is we have an internationally funded UN organization that is educating and has educated generations of Palestinians to hate Israel, hate Israelis, seek their death and seek the destruction of Israel. I think that's really a particularly dark point, unfortunately, on which we have to close for today. I think the subject of UNRWA, Lenny, is something that has to be discussed really widely. And we can just wish you, Marcus, and Impact SE the best of luck in really educating both the international community and the decision makers as to the evils of the curriculum and UNRWA's work. And we hope for our own peace and security that we can find a better way to work than the system of UNRWA. Thank you for joining us.
Marcus, one point, and that's the commercial announcement. Tell our listeners and our viewers where to find you on the website.
Thanks so much, Lenny. So yes, we are Impact SE. So it's impact/se.org. Impact./se.org. Thank you, Lenny, for pointing that out. Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you very much for joining us, Marcus. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will be back with you again tomorrow, 4 o'clock Israel time, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and very early on the West Coast, and much later in Australia.